Greetings, everyone. My name's Brian Benz, and I'm here today to talk to you about perfecting Java CI/CD with GitHub Actions. Follow along if you want to at aka.ms/devops for Java shops, where I have the source code I'll be showing today, as well as instructions on how you can set it up. First thing I want to do is actually show you the application. So this is the application that we're going to build from scratch in the next 25 minutes or so. It's a Spring Boot application. It runs on Java. It runs on something called an Azure Web App. And it's connected to this thing called a feature manager. So a feature manager allows you to add features to your application without changing the source code. And the way you do that, I'm just going to go into the Azure portal here. I can click on one of these features. This feature is called Beta. When I click on it, it updates the feature flag. And when I go back out to my application and refresh, there's a couple of changes, but the most notable one is that we have a picture of our developer advocate bit displayed. That's the feature that I'm using for this demo. Like I say, just a simple Spring Boot application, but this feature could be anything. And you can do more than just turn it off and on manually. We'll be talking about that towards the end of this talk. This is what the application looks like. You can turn on and off that feature, and we're going to deploy this out to an Azure Web App, and we're going to connect it to that feature flag. I like to show this demo because it's not just a simple Hello World standalone application. It actually has a connection to something else, which is what most applications out there in the real world do. They usually connect to something or other. Let's get into how you actually build this. We're going to start in the Azure portal. The Azure portal is your starting point for everything. It's portal.azure.com. And if you don't have an Azure account, you can go and get a free trial at portal.azure.com as well. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new web app. This is the application I showed you is running on a web app. And we're going to deploy that out to Azure. And we're going to use GitHub Actions to do the deployment. So let's get started. This is a resource group. That's important to remember. This little square here is a resource group, and this is where I keep all my resources. My resource group is called DevOps for Java Shops. I'm going to create a new web app inside DevOps for Java Shops so I know where it is and it's easy to find and everything's grouped together. Okay, back to creating the web app. Create, and we're going to use that resource group, DevOps for Java Shops. We're going to use a web app name of dev CI/CD for Java. Let's see if that's an okay one. Yes. Okay, so it has to be a unique name at .azurewebsites.net, which CI/CD for Java is. We're going to publish code, but we could use Docker container or a static web app as well. We're going to use a runtime stack of Java. We could use many others, as you can see here. Node, PHP, Python, .NET, of course, Ruby. We're going to show the Java 11 for this. We could use Linux or Windows. We're going to pick Linux, and the region we're actually going to deploy this to is West US 2. The reason for that is I already have what they call an app service plan, which controls the performance of the app built in to West US 2, so it automatically chooses it for me. It just makes it a little bit quicker for demos. Next, we're going to do a deployment, and this is where the CI/CD comes in. So we're going to enable continuous deployment. We're going to use my GitHub account, bbenz. And what we're going to do is we're going to go out to my bbenz organization. We're going to use a repository called DevOps for Java Shops test feature flags. We're going to use the main branch. We're going to review and create this. There's nothing else we need to do. Everything else can be the default settings. And what this is actually going to do is two things. It's going to create the web app for the target code to run on, but how do we actually get the code there? It's going to create what's called a GitHub action. That GitHub action is going to do the deployment. And that deployment itself is going to be controlled by two different jobs in GitHub Actions. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. But this is actually going to fail the first time, which is why I like to show it. Because when you're doing simple things, it's very easy to show how everything works perfectly. But if you're doing something like connecting to a feature manager from your application, you have to be able to handle that in your GitHub action and actually in your web app as well. So this deployment is going on. Yep, there we go. So the deployment is succeeded. Technically, that's true, but because it created the resource, but it's not true in the sense that the application's not running. So if you go to CI/CD for Java and you click here, it tells you, hey, hello, hey, Java developers, this is the screen you get when your code didn't make it to your web app. This is just a blank web app ready to go. It knows it's Java, but there's no code running. And now, because it's a Spring Boot app, there is a default site that we've specified in the Spring Boot app, but still it's not working. So how do we get that to work? We have to go into our repo, which, as you may recall, is DevOps for Java Shop's test feature flags. Inside that repo, here's the action, and the action has failed. So the action has failed, and I already know what it failed, but I'll show it to you folks. When the build with Maven runs, it looks for that feature flag, and it will not build properly unless that's done. That means that we have to fix this action. So to fix the action, we actually have to add an envar. So you go into GitHub workflows. This is where the GitHub action was placed by the web app deployment process. It's called CI/CD for Java. And we actually need to update this with an environment variable. That environment variable is hidden in this repo, but the action that we caught is automatically generated, so it doesn't know where it is. I need to edit this GitHub action. So I could do that right here. I could edit this, but that's not really good software development or DevOps practice. What I'm going to do is, instead of cloning this, making a change, and then pushing it back out to the repo on GitHub, which will, by the way, trigger that workflow to run again, I'm actually going to create something called a Codespace. Codespaces are this cool, relatively new thing that allows you, here's what you're used to in your GitHub repo. You know, you can clone this. If you go over here to the Codespaces tab, I can create a new Codespace. What this is, it's going to clone my repo into a container, and that container is running on something called a GitHub runner. And that container is then going to basically have all my code plus Visual Studio Code in it, ready to go for me to make any edits. And I push out, just like you would any clone, to my repo when I'm done. So if I go in here to my GitHub workflows, this is the one I just showed you a minute ago. It's missing that reference to the environment variable. Here's the reference. This is a previous workflow that I keep here just so I can do this. So this is the old one. I can just add this. It's disabled, but I can actually add this to my new working action and then push it out to the repo. So this is, just bookmark this for a second, this extension pack for Java message. They want us to install something to run here. We don't need extension pack for Java to update the GitHub action, which is all we're doing. So I won't install it, but I'll talk about that in a minute. All right, so I'm going to save this. And you can see over here in the code source control tab, we have one file that needs to change. So we're going to say update envars for CI/CD. Okay, and let's commit that. So it's asking me to stage it. And then I can sync the changes just like you would from a local repo. It's pushing it out there. Let's talk about what this action does when you're actually doing this. This is the action itself. And now it's got a reference to a secret, which we use as an environment variable in this action. And I'll explain those in a second here. But let's talk about the action itself. So anytime there's a code pushed to the repo on the main branch, it's going to trigger two jobs, a build job and a deploy job. The build job runs on Ubuntu latest. It checks out the code. It builds it using Maven, which is what you saw failing before. And then assuming it's successful, it builds a jar file. Then there's a second job that runs on another GitHub runner using Ubuntu again. It grabs the jar from where it was placed and it deploys it out to the web app. It uses a token. Once again, we've got a reference here to something. This token is also secret and not available to everyone who looks at this. So if you clone this repo, you can see this action, but you can't see these secrets. The secrets are over here. If I go into the repo itself and I go into settings, the secrets are action secrets. You can also set up Codespace secrets. Here they are. So the app configuration connection string is the one that refers to the feature manager. It's hidden and it's only in my clone of this. If you clone this, you won't have these secrets available to you. You have to create your own. The deployment process we had for the web app creates this token that we use to secure the connection between the GitHub repo and the web app, which should be obvious why that's desirable. So those two secrets are in this repo, and they won't be in any other clone or fork of this repo. So if we go back in here and we look at our test feature flags now, fingers crossed, yay, it ran. And it deployed properly. So the actual deployment worked this time. Remember down here, this one didn't work. The build was successful, so it's got the whole job. The deploy was successful, but the web app's still not going to run, and we have to fix one more thing before it runs. But if I look here at deploy to Azure Web App, this time we don't get that generic screen, meaning that the code was deployed, but it's still not working. And the reason for that is because we connected the feature manager in the app together with the action, but we didn't connect the feature manager and the app together in the actual runtime app itself. So let's go into our resource group over here again. And I can find, as I mentioned, that's the reason for putting in the resource group is I can find it easily. So the web app itself is there, everything's running, it's cool, but inside configuration, we have to set up a connection between the feature manager and the actual application. I've got a copy of the connection string over here. Don't look, you can't see it all anyway, but that's okay. Basically what that does is makes the connection between the app and the setting itself. So once this gets done, it updated. Let's go back out to our web app now. There it is. Now I can control this. If I go back into the feature manager, I can control this. I can turn on and off the beta. There we go. So if I turn it off, refresh it a couple of times, and bit is gone. All right, so I mentioned before you can do more with Feature Manager than just turning on and off manually the feature. And to do that, you create a new feature. And this, let's call CI/CD for Java. We'll create it. And then what you can do with that is you can actually edit it. And I can apply a feature filter. There's different kinds of feature filters: targeting, time window, and custom. So the cool thing about these is you can say targeting would be a certain location or a certain group of users get to see the new feature, others don't. Time window, of course, is it's a certain time, maybe a weekend or a holiday or a certain period of time that you want to see this feature and then you want to get rid of it. And there's also a custom. The custom is a default percentage, so or a custom can be a percentage. So the percentage itself can be 50 up to 100. You can also set up a group and users. So you can set up a group and users for targeting. You can also set custom, which would be 100% percentage. If we go in here and we say, okay. Then you edit the filter parameters. You put a value of 50. Apply. There you go. So now there's a Microsoft percentage of 50% that's going to be used. Anytime anyone looks at this, it's going to be 50%. You can also change that value later by increasing this percentage. There's two things you can do with this. A/B testing is where you have a new feature. You're not sure if that feature should be implemented, so you give it to a certain percentage of your users. You track and you monitor their behavior to see if it does actually what you intend it to do. The other is blue-green deployments, which is where you have a new feature, you're going to roll it out gradually. You're sure it's going to be implemented. You just need to roll it out now. So you could gradually increase this percentage from 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, till it's 100. And then the next time you do a deployment, you can deploy out to the application with the core code and then start over again with a new feature. So that's A/B testing and blue-green deployments. Check out aka.ms/devops for Java shops, where I have the source code, and also follow me on Twitter.